You think it's safe to have people using crack and heroin and cocaine next to a playground like this? You think that's safe? It's not safe. I'm inheriting a dumpster fire.
This is inadvertently part 2 to our video about a Liberal riding in Montreal that is revolting due to a safe injection and inhalation site being placed next to a school. Pierre was unloading on reporters when they were trying to challenge him about it.
Let's take a look.
So the question was about creating a cohabitation. This is the latest Orwellian terminology that the radical, wacko, bloc liberal politicians like Plante and Trudeau are inventing. And what they mean by that is that kids should have to cohabitate with people who are using crack, heroin, cocaine, and other hard drugs in their play parks like this. This is total wacko. Kids should not have to cohabitate with hard drug use and crime. That's not Canada. What it is leading to is more danger and more violence. And by the way, there's an entire industry of bureaucracies and activists and politicians who are profiting from this misery and want to perpetuate it. And they are pumping more and more money into keeping it going. I will end it. My common sense plan will ban the hard drugs. It will put the money into treatment rather than into handing out narcotics. We will break the dependence on drugs, and we will bring our loved ones home drug-free. And let me just close off by quoting a local resident who describes what it's like to have this so-called cohabitation that the wacko radical mayor and prime minister are pushing. This is from Michael McKenzie, Canadian Research Chair in Child Wellbeing and Professor of Social Work and Pediatrics at the University of McGill. Before the center opened, community resistance was narrowly focused on the drug injection site. The discussion, sadly now, extends to the entire facility, risking to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is no evidence in the literature I have read that commingling transitional housing with a supervised injection inhalation site is a prudent move in supporting recovery of those newly housed. I make no apologies because that I don't want my children seeing sex acts on the way home from school. I feel no shame in saying it is unacceptable to have people publicly masturbating or assaulting neighbors. Communities, much like the families who comprise them, can be both compassionate and set firm boundaries about unacceptable public behavior that harms people and traumatizes children. It is compassionate to demand more from politicians and the Benoit Laub Center. That's Michael McKenzie, Canada Research Chair in Child Wellbeing and Professor of Social Work and Pediatrics at the University of McGill. That sounds like common sense to me.
It is common sense. It is common sense that children should not have to be exposed to people who are actively using or addicted to illicit substances and all the horrible things that go along with that.
I'm just beside myself that we're having these conversations.
You know, I'm not going to apologize, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Everybody in society needs to participate and function and follow certain rules to make society function properly. You cannot have people who are being permitted to use illegal substances in a community where there are small children going to school literally just down the street and expect things to run smoothly. There's a reason why drug use is frowned upon in society. There is a reason why people who use drugs are ostracized. it's not just bad for the people who are doing the drugs. It's bad for the community around them as well. It's bad for the people who love them. It's bad for the people in the community.
Well, and our video that we did on this, it talks about some of the proponents of this site, and they're saying, yay, 36 people are now no longer homeless. And this is what this doctor was talking about, or sorry, this chair. He was saying, well, yeah, there's a site for transitional housing, transitioning people out of homelessness and into, long-term self-sustaining lodging. So I think he is for that, but against the actual safe injection part of it. And what he's saying in that letter is, before the site opened, the community was only against the safe injection site. They weren't against the actual transitional housing piece. But now, since everything has gone to hell in a handbasket after the site is open, now the whole community is against the whole facility. That's what he's saying. But the fact that we are having a conversation and arguing with people when we say, I don't want my 5-year-old, my 6-year-old, all the way up to my 13-year-old to be exposed to adults practicing single-sex acts in the street. Like, this is an actual argument that we're having, and the response is, well, people just have to adapt. You know what? You're right. People have to adapt. The people that, want to do that in public have to adapt to the fact that they can't.
Right, or go to jail. It's therapy or jail. Honestly, those are the two paths that I see. Get treatment or go to jail. That's it.
Joe Journal, Canadian Press. If you can, answer in English and French as well. So, on the subject of NATO, why won't you commit to meeting the NATO target instead of saying you would work toward meeting the spending commitment? The difference being saying you're going to do something versus working toward or trying to do something.
I always say what I mean and mean what I say. I make promises that I can keep. And right now, we are, our country is broke after 9 years of Trudeau, who's doubled our national debt, ballooned our bureaucracy, caused the worst inflation in 40 years, driven 25% of our population into poverty, and 25% of our children into hunger. So, as you can imagine, I'm inheriting a dumpster fire.
It's like Pierre's on our show. And God, it shouldn't be funny, but it's what is funny is the fact that Pierre is speaking the language of your average Canadian. And he's right. And, the good thing about what he's saying is this is why people want to trust Pierre. Not that people do trust Pierre or trust him 100%, but this is why people want to trust him. It's because he says, I don't make promises that I can't keep. Because what's the number one thing that people assume politicians do when trying to get elected? Promise the world.
Well, yeah, look at Trudeau. All these promises that he's made, from election reform to, affordable housing, like all these promises he's broken.
Yeah, and he's made no effort to actually try and keep them. I think it's actually a brilliant answer, and he's not done yet, as you'll see. When he's asked, well, will you commit to 2% of GDP in terms of the NATO spend? And his response is, I don't know. I need to get at the books to be able to see what we can and can't afford.
Well, it's interesting because I saw this on Reddit today. I didn't watch the clip. I had just seen the still image and the caption, which was pretty much that even Pierre Poilievre won't commit to 2% GDP spend for NATO because it's too much and blah, blah, blah. Now, if you don't know about Reddit, it's pretty much a collection of message boards, but it's very left-leaning. Most of the users are NDP or Liberal voters. Their biggest user base is Americans, and their biggest user base is leftists. So it's just interesting the way they put the spin on that, because he didn't say that he wouldn't commit to it. It's just, I don't know yet. I can't make that commitment yet. I need to look at the books.
Yeah, and as you'll see, he explains even further why.
When it comes to the budget, so every time I make a financial commitment, I'm going to make sure I've pulled out my calculator and done all the math. Because people are sick and tired of politicians just announcing that they're going to spend money without figuring out how they're going to pay for it. Obviously, Trudeau has demolished our military, and my common sense approach is I will cut foreign aid to dictators, terrorists, and multinational bureaucracies. I will crack down on corruption, back office bureaucracy, and procurement bungles. And I will use the savings from that to reinforce our military. We will buy equipment based on best value to make our money go further, as we did during the previous Conservative government, which re-equipped our forces rapidly, on time, and on budget to fight in Afghanistan. And I will replace the woke culture with a warrior culture so that we can get recruitment back up and running. We can recruit the next generation of soldiers, sailors, and airmen. Thank you.
I think that last point that Pierre made, taking it from a woke culture to a warrior culture, is really important, because the woke left is all telling us that we should be ashamed of our heritage, that we should be ashamed of our culture, that we should be ashamed of Canada. So why would you want to protect it? You know, why would you want to go into the armed forces? Why would you want to go into the Navy or the Air Force to protect a country that you don't believe in?
Well, I take even a different response to that, but I don't disagree with what Tanya said. If you were doing a job interview and your job was to drive a forklift, and before you were offered the job, they took you on a tour of the place that you were working, and you saw that there was 5 forklift drivers, but only 2 forklifts, and only one of them was working. Is this going to be a place where you want to continue that interview process?
Probably not.
Right, because you see the state of the forklifts that you're going to be driving. And if you're only going to be paid when you drive the forklift, and A, there's not enough forklifts, and B, only one of them is working, then why would you even, entertain that? Now, it's not that our men and women are not paid, if there's no equipment, but the point is that there's a perception that our military is such a sad state of affairs that it's become a joke. And it's really, really a shame, like a big shame. At the end of World War II,
Canadians were feared. Like, the Germans were terrified of the Canadian troops.
We had the 3rd largest Navy in the world, believe it or not. And, we were a force to be reckoned with.
We were. World War I, too.
And then over time, we just relied on our big brother to the south to essentially protect us. And so we invested less and less and less and less into our national defense. And when you have this far left culture coming in and prioritizing feelings and recruitment standards over, actually quality of our soldiers and quality of the gear that we give them, so they can be confident that when they're in a dangerous situation, they're going to have the best gear that's available to them.
Eric Andrew, Globe and Mail. Your party hasn't actually said what your policy towards safe injection sites will be. So you want to close this one, but will you close others? What will you do around safe injection sites across the country?
I will be closing them. We will close safe injection sites next to schools, playgrounds, anywhere else that they endanger the public and take lives. We will defund. By the way, they're not safe injection sites. I'm sorry. I used your dishonest language. See, you just repeat the language that is fed to you by the government. Are you a CP? Are you a CP?
CP?
Who are you with?
Globe Mail.
You're with the Globe and Mail. You guys repeat the same language you get from the radical liberal NDP activists and bureaucracies. You call them safe. How can they be safe? You think it's safe when a bullet comes flying out of one of these sites to kill a mother in Toronto? Do you think that's safe? You think it's safe to have people using crack and heroin and cocaine next to a playground like this? You think that's safe? It's not safe.
Supervised injection site.
They're drug dens. They're drug dens. And they've made everything worse. Everywhere they've been done, they've made everything worse. And I know what you'll do now. You'll now go and call the same bureaucrats who caused the chaos, and you'll call them experts.
Who are these
Wow.
experts?
Wow. It's good to see that, though, that somebody is standing up against this, because society's gone backwards when we're putting the rights of addicts and drug dealers ahead of families and children. That's not okay.
And this is what the far left doesn't seem to grasp, or they just don't care, or maybe both, is that you cannot uphold the rights of one group at the expense of another group. You can't do that.
Well, they say, oh, it's safer for the addicts to use these injection sites as opposed to like doing it in the drug dealer's basement.
Yeah,
or
it's safer for them.
Well, my retort to that is that everything we do in life comes with a risk. I know if I drive my car on the highway, there's a risk, though it may be small, that I could get into an accident. I know that if I go skydiving, there's a risk I could die. So if you're going to be using drugs, there is a risk that you could overdose.
But the thing that gets me is, okay, so, well, it's safer for the addicts. Well, what about the kids that are around this? Well, it's safer for the addicts. Screw the addicts in that case. Like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
And this is it. Like, we're putting people who are breaking the law, because drugs are still illegal. So we're putting the rights of people who are breaking the law ahead of not only law-abiding citizens, but children who have no choice, children who don't understand. I recall about a month ago, we had spoken to a friend of ours who's a police officer to get some information on one of the stories we were doing. I think it was actually about Safe Supply, come to think of it. And he said to me, Tanya, whenever I take my kids to the park now, I have to
do a sweep.
Yeah, I have to do a sweep of the equipment, of like the playground, to make sure there's no needles or anything that they could step on. He had told me a story once that he got pricked with a dirty needle at work, and he was on antivirals for like the next 6 weeks because he could have ended up with like hepatitis C or HIV or some other horrible disease. And he said, Tanya, those medications that they gave me for that needle stick made me so sick. I had to be off work. I was extremely ill in bed the whole time because that's how strong they were. I don't want that happening to my children.
Well, and there's cases of children stepping on needles and catching something and dying.
Right. This is serious stuff.
So, and do I blame the addicts for the safe injection site? No. That's the government.
I blame these government policies. They're the ones that allowed this opioid crisis to happen in the first place. And they're the ones that are permitting it to continue with things like Safe Supply, which here on the show we refer to as PSAD, or publicly supplied addictive drugs, and also these safe injection sites. I use the air quotes because these are marketing terms. These are not medical terms. They're not even true. Like, it's just, the whole thing is infuriating, and our government has permitted this situation to spiral out of control to the point where it's harming innocent civilians and children.
But this is what the far left does. And you'll notice 1984. It's there for a reason, to remind all of us. What the far left does is they create new language. And they do that so they can redefine society. So even around this, they've created new terms: safe supply, safe injection site, toxic drug supply, because apparently there's a bad form of drugs and a good form of drugs.
Well, and that's just not true. I mean, I used to work in a vet clinic. You guys know that. And some of the drugs that we used in the clinic for the animals, specifically for anesthesia, are the same drugs you can buy on the street. But if I were to take, something off the street or take the exact same drug from the vet clinic, they're still just as harmful and still just as potent. Like, just because it comes from the street versus the clinic or whatever doesn't make one safer than the other. It's all dangerous.
Anyway, we could probably go, keep talking for about another 2 hours for this, and I don't want to handle that in the edit process. So let's see where else Pierre is going with this, because he is spitting fire.
The people who caused the 400% increase in drug overdose deaths in Vancouver, you're going to call them experts. They are expert at destroying communities and ending lives, but at perpetuating their own industries, because that's what they are. They are industries that want to expand, and the only way they can continue to exist is by keeping the misery going. So they're not safe. They are unsafe injection sites. They are drug dens, and we oppose them. The Supreme Court has been very clear that these radical bureaucrats don't have the right to open these drug dens anywhere they want. The court made it clear that there are reasonable restrictions that can be placed on them, and that includes playgrounds. So I've told you my policy. I'm against the drug dens next to children's playgrounds, schools, other places where people who are vulnerable in the community live. We will defund them. There will not be a single taxpayer dollar from the Poilievre government going to drug dens. Every single penny will go to treatment and recovery services to bring our loved ones home drug-free. Thank you.
So what he's talking about is there was a Supreme Court ruling that actually came down in 2011 when the then Conservative Minister of Health was trying to block a safe injection sites from being opened in BC. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that it was actually a breach of the Charter of Rights for them to do that. But what they did, put in that ruling was that there was reasonable restrictions that could be put in place in terms of where these things could be opened. They didn't outline what they were, but what they did say is, basically in line with public safety. So we found an article actually in on a news site out of Barrie, Ontario. Shout out to Barrie, Ontario today. But they had some good stuff there. So the former Conservative government passed the Respect for Communities Act following the Supreme Court's decision requiring prospective supervised consumption sites to meet a suite of 26 criteria in order to open. That included tracking crime rates and providing medical evidence, along with handing in letters from provincial health ministers, local police, and other stakeholders. The act was panned upon by opposition parties, that would be the Liberals and the Bloc and the NDP, and health groups who said it blocked sites from opening, bogged down the application process, and created unnecessary barriers. After they were elected in 2015, the Liberals passed their own law, allowing facilities to open with more ease, citing the need to better respond to the overdose crisis.
And what better way to respond to an overdose crisis than by providing a location for people to administer opioids to themselves?
And handing out free drugs.
Like, that's not treatment.
Right? So, I looked into this act that the Conservatives actually passed, and it was pretty extensive. And there was a whole slew of things that they had to do, which was letters from the local police chief, the local municipal government, the provincial government, and I believe it was the member of parliament as well. And they all had to essentially write a letter that detailed why this was a good thing and how it accounted for accommodating the interest of public safety, among other restrictions as it related to the location of the site. So I find it deplorable that the Liberals looked at that and said, oh, that's preventing sites from being opened. Yeah, because you weren't allowed to open sites next to a frickin' school. But we got to get around that because we got to get to handing out these drugs to stop people from using drugs. And that's the whole problem.
Yeah.
The Safe Supply Initiative, the intent of it is not to stop drug use.
No, it's not at all.
And they've admitted this. The only intent of the Safe Supply Initiative is to allow people to get high off of government-provided drugs without potentially, nasty additive drugs included in the recipe that are in the quote-unquote so-called toxic drug supply.
Well, it's to prevent deaths, and the other theory, I suppose, is to prevent people from hiding their drug use. So if you go to one of these injection sites and you use there and you OD, then somebody's going to be there to help you. I mean, like I was saying earlier, all behaviors in life have certain risks associated with them, and drug use, no matter whether you're using drugs that are pure or whether you're using drugs that you've purchased off the street, they all have a risk of death. I know when we were in school, one of the things that we were taught was that the dose makes the poison. So it doesn't matter where that substance came from, whether it came from the pharmacy or whether it came from the street. If you take too much, you're still going to overdose.
Nice try. Nice try. The Supreme Court didn't say that. See, I know what you're trying to do. The Supreme Court didn't. No, I'm giving you my answer. The Supreme Court did not say that there can be. It's okay. The Supreme Court didn't say that you can have a drug den wherever you want. It said that there are reasonable restrictions that can be placed to stop them from opening up in locations that endanger the community or where there is community opposition. That's what the Supreme Court actually said. Now, I know that wacko politicians and the Liberals and the NDP and their supporters in the media want to make it sound like there's a constitutional obligation that we allow these drug dens anywhere they want to go up. That is not true. That is the opposite of true. We have the power under Section 56.1 of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act to reject these drug dens and shut them down where they endanger the public, and that's what I will do.
And there you go.
It's like Nevada, where they still have legal brothels, but they have to be, I think it's so far from a church and so far from a school, so the only place they can be is in the middle of the desert.
Yeah, kind of. Well, but this is the thing, and what Pierre is talking about is what they call a landmark decision, because it was precedent setting, and it was in 2011, as we mentioned before, and the left took this as just a major victory, that yay, we can open these sites wherever we want, and it's not true. And the Conservatives went so far as to make sure that it was very clear what the process would be in order to actually open one of these things, because the Supreme Court had come back at them saying, no, you have to be able to open these. So then the Conservatives said, fine, if we're going to be forced to have to open these, then we're going to do it in the most responsible way that we can.
Because again, they didn't want to put the rights of a certain subset of people above the whole community.
Right. Because of the potential destructive impact on the community. Fast forward to 2024, and look what we have sowed. Right? So we are reaping it in all of these communities, everywhere. So it's great to hear somebody stand up and literally talk common sense. And as I said in the beginning, it's bizarre to me that we are even having to have this conversation, that it's not a good idea to have a naked dude jerking off next to a school. For some reason, this is discriminatory talk and not worthy of people, according to the far left. Well, when it comes to our kids, we're going to prioritize them over some guy addicted to substances. And while he deserves sympathy, our children deserve protection.